What happens when a pastor loses touch with their soul? You know, in the rush of ministry, it's easy to believe that our value comes from how much we produce, how well we lead, and how selfless we appear. I fell in that trap many, many times. Still do. But beneath the sermons and schedules, many ministry leaders really are emotionally starved. They're empathy deprived, and they're quietly burning out. Today's guests, Bill and Kristi Gaultiere of Soul Shepherding, they've spent decades helping Christian leaders recover emotional health and to restore their first love with Jesus and return to ministry with a soul that is whole and not just holy. They have a new book out. It's called Deeply Loved, and it offers more than comfort. It's an invitation to receive God's empathy and extend it to others. And even just hearing that, some of you might be thinking, I don't need empathy. I need my problems to get solved. We look at why empathy is not weakness, but it's oxygen for the soul, and how ministry transitions, forced exits, or even spiritual exhaustion can become unexpected doorways to healing. Listen in. This is the Life After Ministry podcast. Hey, Bill and Kristi Gaultiere, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. So glad. Noe Revere and I are both very glad to have you here today.
Yes,
hey, Matt and Noe, we are blessed to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for your ministry. We really appreciate it. We got a lot of overlap, what you're doing and what we do in soul shepherding.
Yes, and have a lot of appreciation for those in your audience, some of them in ministry and some of them in ministry transitions. And we have journeyed with people like you. We've experienced our own transitions through the years. So we feel right at home.
Good. Well, welcome. Tell us a little bit before we jump into what we're really going to talk about. Give us a little background on Soul Shepherding. What is the ministry? What is the work that you guys have been doing for so many years?
Well, Soul Shepherding, we help people go deeper with Jesus in their emotional health and in healthy leadership. We really want them to be able to reignite in their first love, their passion, their intimacy for Jesus. Often, unfortunately, along the way in ministry, we can lose that. And so that's one of the things we're all about, is helping people remember that this isn't just for the sake of others. This is for us, and we need our relationship with the Lord to be vibrant and growing and alive. And then our ministry and our work, whatever context, to come out of the overflow of that. And then in all of our life, we want to be healthy. We want to be whole in our soul as well as holy. And so we're really looking at in our work, in our whole life, to have that integrity coming out of healthy rhythms of intimacy with Christ and also relationships in our life as well.
So we're inviting pastors, missionaries, and other leaders into the easy yoke of Jesus, which we say is Jesus' easy way of doing hard things. The easy yoke is for getting work done. We're pulling a plow across the field, but we're doing it with Jesus, in relationship with him. And psychologically, we refer to that as a secure attachment relationship. We have this intimate bond with the Lord. And so our specialty is helping the pastors and missionaries and other leaders to not only do their work for God, but to learn how to also do it with God. And I think we all, believe in that, but learning how operationally, even habitually, to do our service, our work, our leadership, our pastoring, our mission work, to do that in a way that we can enjoy God's presence as we do it, and we can receive insight and comfort and encouragement, wisdom from the Lord as we do it. That's where we're really seeking to help leaders to flourish so they don't burn out and so that they're strong and thriving. And we do that in some basic ways. We do that through our Soul Shepherding Institute retreats that are 5-day immersive experiences in a community of about 50 pastors, missionaries, spiritual directors, other leaders. And then we do that through spiritual direction and coaching relationships that we provide for people. And then through our resources like our new book, Deeply Loved, Receiving and Reflecting God's Great Empathy for You.
That's good. Now that really, I want to center in this conversation. We want to talk about this book. It's actually releasing today, which is great. It's always fun. So happy release day there. But you're really looking at this idea of empathy. And I think sometimes we have emotional barriers. They're holding us back. and they get in the way of really having that relationship with God and with others. So give us the synopsis of what were you trying to do? What was the problem you were addressing when you wanted to write this book?
Well, often we have lived in an empathy desert. There haven't been people who we have really been safe with in order to be emotionally honest with what's really going on in our lives, what's really going on in our ministry, what's really going on in our families, what's really going on at work, because we're not confident that they would respond with empathy. In fact, we often maybe one of those barriers is we're afraid to be judged. And some of that might be because we're judging ourselves. Maybe we've internalized the judgment of parents or somebody, an early influencer or leader in our life. And we tend to think maybe that we're too emotional or we're too sensitive. That was my story. And so the shame over I had of having emotions or having needs, I would shame myself. And that would be a barrier for me being able to be in a healthy relationship where I could really receive God's empathy and love with confidence. I couldn't agree with his grace in my life until I learned that.
In my case, I grew up as the oldest of 5 children and was what you call a parentified child. I had a lot of responsibility at a young age, including supporting my mom emotionally with all kinds of challenges with a big family and even in some of her disappointments in her marriage. And so at a really beginning as young as 9 years old, I was listening to my mom and trying to help her manage things. And even before that, I was like the family helper and babysitter. So I had a lot of weight on me, and then I didn't figure it out until really in my 20s as I studied psychology, but I internalized a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And so I was not connected to my emotions. I was all about leading, thinking, doing, helping other people. And so there was a lot of stress and anxiety that I had to work through as I learned the language of emotions, and it really it came to a head later in my life when I burned out as a psychologist and also a pastor. I had 2 sides of my career at the time, and thankful for how God met me through that.
What do you guys think for Christian leaders and ministers? It's hard for us to still receive love, yet that's the very thing we are trying to give to the world and give in our ministries, and it's the very thing that God designed for us to receive from him. And we know the source of love, the great Father, yet there's such a barrier for us to practically live it out on a regular basis in relationships with staff members, with people we're ministering to, with our spouses. I mean, what do you see as the barrier specifically for Christian leaders that we seem to have the answer of? We know who love is, but why is it so difficult for us to receive that?
Yeah, the cause of the gospel and leading people to Jesus and their discipleship and to share the gospel with others. I mean, it is so great, it's so compelling. And so we get sacrificial to the point of neglecting our own needs at times and not setting boundaries, and we get over-identified with our work. We get over-identified with other people's needs and the needs of our organization if we're leading an organization, or our team if we're leading a team. And so that's a sad thing, and we need help correcting that. And part of what happens is we're prone to lose the fire that we started with when we began the ministry. And we began oftentimes with a call from the Lord and an experience of grace that was very healing and transformational for us. But then along the way, we get lost in leading, shepherding, helping others. And so that's a big part of why our ministry exists, is to help to reawaken that love relationship with God and help us live into that in our relationships. And we teach that in order to be really consistently fruitful, empathetic, compassionate, helpful to others, we need to be receiving, certainly from the Lord personally, but then also in our relationships with safe people, whether that's a spiritual director, a mentor, a spouse, a brother, sister, pastor that we're in relationship with. But we need sources of support ourselves as well, so that we're taking care of that inner life, because the power to bear fruit for God and to love other people, it comes from our own abiding in Christ, which includes, as Jesus taught us in his new commandment, that we love one another. that's really the ordinary way that we connect with God is through our relationships with each other. And so we need some relationships that we prioritize that are not ministry. They're not shepherding others, but where I'm in a mutual relationship with a friend or I'm being supported by a spiritual director or mentor, and I'm receiving and I'm connecting with God through that. In addition, of course, to our Bible reading and the other spiritual disciplines that we might do.
I think the world that we live into is so conditional, and we learn so early on this earning mentality that I need to earn love, or a substitute that feels somewhat close to love. And so that's a lot also that we begin to subtly make that shift into an earning mentality without even realizing it, that we're trying to maybe earn God's love or earn other people's love. And much of our ministry work can slip under that, and we're not even aware that we've made that shift.
The big point Kristi's making that's so important is it's deeper than our doctrine. You know, our doctrines and beliefs in Scripture are very important. They're essential. But we also have to look under the hood into our heart and our relationships and our emotions and our needs and how we're trusting other people and God.
You know, you guys write that empathy is oxygen for the soul. What happens when empathy shows up in a situation where there hasn't been, when it's oxygen starved or it's empathy starved, or the desert, like you talk about it? When empathy shows up, how does that transform, and where have you seen that show up?
Yeah, it's like you're thirsty and you finally get a drink of water, or it's like you've grown up in a smoggy city and you didn't even realize it was smoggy all the time, but then you moved out in the country and it's like, oh, you get to breathe in deep, and it's like you get to rest and relax and you feel alive. And it's like the world goes from black and white to color, because in our wording, empathy is being deeply loved. Empathy is being in a relationship, a conversation where someone is seeking to understand your emotions, your thoughts, your experiences, to help you know that it's really true you are deeply loved by God. And of course, Jesus is our perfect source of empathy and God's word. But the point we're making is that we also need that in ordinary daily ways. We need that enfleshed in our relationships with other people who can be as Christ's ambassadors to us. And the thing about this message that is uncommon is that we will normally talk, like in church and Christian podcasts, about the need for us to be Christ's ambassadors to others and to help other people in compassionate ministry, which is so true and so important. We're saying that the power and source to do that, of course, is in God and our relationship with God, but an essential aspect of that is empathy, being deeply understood, known, and cared for. And so it's in those kinds of relationships that my soul is really nourished, so that I have the sustaining power to be giving to other people and loving other people.
You know, when we're well oxygenated, I'm not saying that right, but when we've got oxygen in our soul or in our bodies, you know, we're able to lift more weight. We're able to think clearer and better. We sleep better. Everything goes better. Our bodies need that oxygen. And it's the same way when we are receiving God's empathy for us. It's empowering to us. It energizes us. We are able to give so much more to other people, because just like Scripture says, we love because he first loved us. Well, we empathize because he first empathized with us. As we are receiving that empathy, it makes such a big difference. We had a pastor on retreat with us who had said that he had lived growing up without empathy, and that actually he even believed that emotions were unreliable and that they shouldn't lead him in any way. And he said, I tried not to acknowledge any negative emotions in my life. He said, I covered them up, I repressed them, and I didn't realize that my emotions were embedded deep within me, and that I needed to get in touch with them to know myself and even know the sin in myself. He said, he confessed to us, I treated my emotions like a whining child. I denied them. I tried to repress them. I tried to push through them to achieve. And when he found that he was able to acknowledge this and to feel his emotions, he was able to, for the first time, feel intimacy again with his wife, with his family. His relationships at work got better because he realized that he had been treating others in his life the same way he had been treating his own negative emotions. He'd been dismissing their emotions, and he'd seen it increase the anxiety and the conflict at work and in his home. So it's just one example of the difference that empathy can make. When you get this vision, this understanding, and you actually believe there's empathy available for you, you can get emotionally honest with yourself and with God and with another ambassador of him.
I'm curious, is empathy, because my sense as I'm sitting here is empathy feels soft and it feels female. Can you break down the male, female, it feels like females are much more likely to give empathy and probably even receive empathy. Is this harder for guys, not only to give that and to receive that? And I'm just even thinking about some of our pastors, it feels like there's a wall. It's a little harder for us as dudes.
It often is the case, especially for men who are probably 40 and up in that generation versus the younger generation. Mm-hmm. The younger generation of men coming up are more sensitive and more aware of their need for empathy. But I'm an example of what you're saying, Matt. I'm a thinker and a doer. I wasn't aware of my emotions, and I began to learn the language of emotions as a senior in college. And I was meeting with my favorite psychology professor who was a mentor to me. I was her teacher's aide, and so I got to meet with her every week, and I was ready for her to teach me how to be a Christian counselor, and I was asking her questions about this because in exchange for being her teacher's aide, she would give me a meeting every week. And then she said, well, Bill, we can get to that later. Tell me how you feel. And I was looking over my shoulder, what are you talking? I have no idea. What do I feel? What do you feel? I mean, it wasn't on my radar as a thinker, a doer, oldest child, like I was saying. And so it was a long journey for me. It's just 18 inches from your head to your heart, but it could be a long ways to get in touch with those emotions for some of us. But I've learned along the way that there are tender and sensitive parts of me too. And that while I am primarily a thinker and a doer, becoming more aware of my emotions has helped me so much with being more aware of and considerate of what other people feel and what they need and what's going on inside of them. And I've learned that all things in ministry, not only therapy and spiritual direction and coaching where it's an intimate conversation, obviously empathy is important there, but it's important in leadership and in leading teams and in preaching and all forms of communication, because it's why we're telling stories in this conversation, because we care about you who are listening to this podcast and what's going on in your life, and we're trying to understand your experiences. And so that's what empathy is. Empathy is trying to understand other people. And what we add to that is that the key is we're helping other people know that they're deeply loved by God. And we're just saying that as leaders, not only do we need to give this to people for our ministry to be maximally fruitful and a blessing to people and to God, but we need it for our own selves so that we don't burn out and so that we're alive in our intimacy with God and we're receiving what we need.
My respect for Bill shot way up when he began to get emotionally honest with me and receive my empathy, because I really respected his ability to take courage, to be honest with me and to receive from me and to trust me with that. And I saw how it was helping him to grow. And I saw how it was helping him in his relationship with God and helping him to be more loving. And so my respect for him shot up. And also I would say to men, it takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage to be empathetic. Mm. And so in that sense, it can be very manly. The other thing I would say is that when Bill learned empathy, it really helped us. Also, I respected you because you didn't try to fix me anymore. And I didn't want to be fixed. I didn't care what he knew, even though he had his PhD in psychology, until I knew that he cared. And so when he learned to give me empathy and I knew he cared, then I was more open to receive the brilliance of his great knowledge and understanding and wisdom and discernment.
And what I'm hearing in that is emotions is not weak, and it's not weakness.
That's right.
And yet, many of us, particularly men, can lean away from emotions, lean away from scary words like empathy or sensitivities or caring or understanding, because we've been maybe conditioned. I don't know exactly what it is, but that these things are weakness, but you guys are sharing that it's actually strength. And hearing you, Kristi, even just talk to Bill in that manner of like you respected him more. It did something to draw you guys closer, and Bill somewhat taking the lead on that of changing. Maybe it sounds like what some changes you made that actually made things stronger. And I want to go back and kind of tie in an element you guys brought in earlier about attachment, because I know attachment it's a big thing right now in psychology and in secular world and also in the Christian world. And it sounds like what you're talking about is once we know we're deeply loved, that is a proponent of we're securely attached versus insecurely attached, either avoidant or we are pursuers. Can you share a little bit more about that part of it, of maybe even some practical tools of how do we embody in practical ways becoming attached and receiving this deeply loved idea and this empathy from the Lord, and then sharing that with one another? What are some practical ways we become this?
Well, one of the things we do is we need to find a safe place, somebody who really is able to listen to us and to hold that space for us to be able to process out loud our experience, our emotions, our longings, our fears, our frustrations. Someone who actually will get curious and ask curious questions to help draw us out, and someone who is able to really hear and put in their own words what they're hearing to communicate that they're understanding. Somebody who's willing to listen to us and imagine, what would it be like to be me in my personality, in my circumstance, with my responsibilities, in my relationships, and would really be willing to be an ambassador of Christ to me in that way and mirror God's love for me in that, to mediate his grace to me where I am and help me to awaken to that more and to receive that and to agree with it more.
It's, starts with simple things like sitting down with a friend over coffee and having a conversation that gets personal, gets more vulnerable, listening to each other, praying for each other. And it can be energized and guided by a simple thing like reading a book like Deeply Loved, that is unpacking some of our needs and challenges and opportunities, and doing that through Scripture. I think that the low-hanging fruit in this conversation is a deeper realization of how compassionate Jesus is. For many Christians, that would be like the main word that we would use to describe Jesus. He's compassionate for all people. And that compassion includes empathy. Because if compassion lacks empathy, that's really understanding the needs of the people that we're ministering to, it's not really compassion. It's like something I want to do to help people, but it's not maximally helpful. To be helpful to people, we really need to understand their situation, their values, their personality, and understand some of the deeper needs sometimes. Maybe it's not only that they're hungry and they need food, but they also need dignity to learn how to work. And so it's like asking these questions and being prayerful for people to pay attention to the deeper needs that might be below the surface of the circumstances of their life, and getting to know people. And that's the most powerful ministry, even in witnessing and sharing the gospel. All things discipleship, certainly, but it's relational. It's getting to know people. And to feel cared for, people need to be listened to. They need to be able to tell their story. They need someone that asks questions and is curious for what's going on under the surface. So to begin to realize that, well, Jesus is like this. Jesus is compassionate. Jesus is empathetic. And the Son of God became human. In his humanity, Jesus needs empathy. He needs empathy primarily and most obviously from God his Father, the God he knows as Abba, Papa. And so we see lots of scriptures that show Jesus getting away from the crowds for prayer and for quiet space and setting boundaries on even on his work and his ministry and with people to nurture that intimacy with God. But we also see Jesus being vulnerable with other people at times. And while in one sense he never entrusts himself fully to another human being, but only to God, but yet in a different way, he does trust people to listen to him, to care for him. He asked the Samaritan woman at the well, will you give me a drink? I'm thirsty. he asks for hospitality at Mary and Martha's house or at Simon's house. And of course, he cries out to God with a lot of vulnerability. But in the depths and the most painful time in the Garden of Gethsemane, he includes Peter, James, and John in that. And he's vulnerable with them and asks them to watch and pray with him and to pay attention to what he's feeling. And so the human Jesus models for us the courage of being vulnerable and the need that we have as human beings. Just like we need sleep and food and so forth, we need to be listened to. We need to be cared for. We need empathy and compassion. And so at a basic level, just rethinking our understanding of discipleship and spiritual growth and ministry to realize that empathy is embedded in this. It's often not named. Like we don't think about the quality of the air that we're breathing. But when the air is really oxygenated, there's that word, right? Oxygenated. Empathy is this oxygen for our souls. What a difference it makes. And so empathy is like that. It's ubiquitous. It's always available in God. And there's our people who would give us empathy, and we all need it, but we take it for granted. And so we have to slow our lives down to realize, I need somebody that I can confess my sins to as unto the Lord, that I can say, well, this is what I'm struggling with. This is where I feel stuck. This is where I need empathy. And sometimes that means talking to a spiritual director or a coach that's really, a professional trained in this. And a lot of times it's with a friend that we can be vulnerable with and we can pray for each other. And so just taking that risk of getting in those kinds of relationships to both receive and reflect God's empathy.
We have specific tools in Deeply Loved after each chapter to help people to learn to do this. And again, to your point, there's no healthy attachment without empathy first. Empathy needs to precede that. And then also, as we're talking about Jesus and empathy, we've got over 100 scriptures from our Bible on empathy that we can easily miss. And you might be surprised as you examine those, but that's another tool that we have. And also talk about Jesus's emotions and how he didn't hide those, how he connected and was attuned and attached to his Father and invited others into that relationship as well.
So the book is a beautiful mixture of theology. You're bringing the Bible in. You just did that right now. And then there's psychologically sound input. So this is not a psych book. This is not a theology book. It really is marrying the two together. And one of the things that you do, which every pastor, ministry leader in the world loves alliteration. If it's alliterated, it's from God. And so you guys brought in 4 A's of empathy. Maybe the 4 E's were too hard to pull off, but what are the 4 A's of empathy that you walk through real quick?
Yeah. The first is asking to be able to listen. Mm-hmm. And then as you are listening, to attune to the emotions that you're hearing. You want to really tune in, and it might even help you to think about, well, what might I feel if I was in the situation the person is describing, and then see, is that what they're feeling? Or if they're feeling, if they say that they were upset, you might ask another question to get and understand, well, were you angry or were you just anxious? What's upset? Like you're wanting to understand the emotions that they're feeling on the deepest level that they're willing to take you there or that they're aware of. And then you're also looking, the third A is you're looking to acknowledge the significance of the experience for them. So if this was a situation where they were upset, but it was the first time it ever happened to them, what they were describing to you, it might be just a little bit upset. But if it was something that happened to them that was deeply wounding to them and a key formational time in their life, and it triggered that, the significance of this would be way bigger. And so you want to be listening and acknowledging the significance for somebody, because that's personal. It has special meaning for them. And you want to mirror that God is with them in that. He's intimately acquainted with the significance of this for them and cares about that. And then after you've listened, you've attuned to the emotion, you've acknowledged the significance for someone, and they've felt like you're really understanding, you've shared the meaning with them of what their experience is, then you want to end with affirming their strengths. You want to affirm the things you heard that, as I listened to you, I thought you really have quite a bit of self-awareness. And I just want to affirm you for that. I know that doesn't come without doing some work, and that takes courage to do. And I respect you for that. Or, as you listened, you shared, I could hear you talk about your longing for God. And I'm so happy to hear your longing for him, because he longs for you. And I know your longing is met with his love, his smile, his embrace, or something that would be affirming, something you've heard in this beloved of the Lord that you've just been listening to.
Those 4 A's are for ministering to other people, but they're also for receiving as well. So when I need empathy, I can ask a friend, do you have some time to listen to me? And, sometimes a friend might say, well, not now, but, later I can, or maybe a conversation with a spouse. And so, but being able to ask is super important. Sometimes it's scary for us to take that initiative and ask, but at some level we need to ask, because what happens is if we get into a conversation where somebody is caring for us and praying for us and listening to us, but on the inside, I'm self-critical. I think I'm too much of a burden. I shouldn't be paying attention to all these feelings anyway. I just need to get out and accomplish some things. Then I'm spoiling the empathy, compassion, and grace that's being given to me by the Lord through this person. So what we teach, we call this self-empathy, which means like agreeing with God's grace. It doesn't mean like hugging yourself, do it yourself, by yourself. It means there's a part of every relational interaction where I need to ask for that. I need to accept that. I need to agree with that. Otherwise, something in me is resisting it and pushing it away and spoiling it. So while I'm being listened to, I'll shoot up a prayer of thanks to God. I'll thank my friend that's listening to me. And then we'd go through each of the 4 A's in the same way, that as my friend is attuning to my emotions, I'm attuning to them, connecting with them.
Not repressing them, not avoiding them, not hiding them in shame.
Is with my friend, when my friend is acknowledging the significance and saying, gee, I can see this is really important for you, and you've been stressed about this for a while, and it's been making it hard for you to sleep. I'm receiving that emphasis of attention and care, that it's weighty. And so I agree with that. And then in the final A of the affirmation, when someone affirms, sometimes we're uncomfortable. Sometimes we're uncomfortable because people rush to affirm too quickly. Especially in our Christian traditions, a lot of time, we have the gift of encouragement, and so we encourage each other. It's a good thing, but often it's not the best thing, because what people first need is to be listened to, to be understood, to be known. And so affirmation or encouragement that comes on the heels of that is so much more powerful, because it gets more readily connected to our person rather than our doing. Because when affirmation is just connected to our doing, it's like praise. It's great to be praised, but it's kind of like dessert. You can't live on ice cream and brownies all the time. It tastes nice, but you need meat and vegetables. Well, the meat and the vegetables is grace, compassion, unconditional love, and empathy is embedded in all of that. And so affirmation is the 4th A, very purposefully, because it's more powerful when it comes in that flow.
And if it comes too early, it'll shut down somebody's emotions.
Yeah, because it's hard to receive until you, like you guys are saying, until someone cares. And often you want to first tell your story, and telling your story, being heard, being affirmed, acknowledging the significance, like you're saying, goes such a long way. And then the affirmation of strengths at the end is like the icing on the cake. You guys bring out such a great point that I don't find often at all. I mean, it's really hard to find this point of not only you're given somewhat of a formula to how can we give empathy well, how can we listen well, how can we love well for others, but while someone is doing the work to listen to us, what is the work that I'm doing in order to embed this even within myself, and not just relying on the other person to do a great job at listening, but how can I embed this as attuning to my own needs? And you know what? Someone else is acknowledging maybe my pain. How am I acknowledging my pain, or am I avoiding it, maybe in an insecure attachment, or maybe how am I working too much to just achieve some type of affirmation? But this person is affirming my identity, not my behaviors. And like, wow, that light bulb went off. I never realized this person is affirming who I am, not what I do. And then doing the self-work on that. And I think that's where we get some really good, I think, interrelationships. It's not just relying on others to love us well, but it's also loving ourselves well, as you're saying, through the context and wineskin kind of relationship. And it kind of, I'd like to just ask a question here. Oftentimes leaders need permission to let themselves be loved. And because we do love really well as ministers, as helping professions, we give out love so much. But I wonder if there's anything you can just speak to people that are listening, that they just need that permission from someone else, and from leaders like you guys, from people that are in this area, in this arena. Like, you have permission to allow yourself to be loved. We're granting you somewhat, permission of, let yourself dig at your emotions, let yourself be loved. If you just speak into that for a moment, I think that would go a long way for lots of listeners.
The thing that's helped me the most to receive that permission, because that was hard for me in the early years, was to see Jesus doing that. To see that Jesus set boundaries to prioritize his intimacy with God, and that Jesus took care of his own soul, that he rested, and he paid attention to his emotions, and it was part of how he prayed. Of course, he paid attention to his thoughts as well, but he paid attention to his inner life, and he received God's love very deeply. And he begins his ministry with his Father. Before he's done anything in his public ministry, God the Father says, "Jesus is my beloved Son, and in him I am well pleased." And then Jesus, after the baptism, he goes on a 40-day retreat. And we don't always think about that time in the wilderness as being a retreat, because he's tested by Satan in that. But it was 40 days of meditating on Scripture, praying, being in solitude with God his Father, really deepening in his sense of call, what God had called him to do in his public ministry. And yes, as often happens on retreat, we experience challenges and tests, and Satan comes at us. But Jesus was at his strongest point while he was fasting. It's not like poor Jesus in the wilderness. It's like he's being nourished in his relationship with God and with God's word. And so as he's feeding on that, he knows who he is, and he's able to rebuke Satan and stay true and strong. So Jesus had permission in his humanity to receive grace. Luke says Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and grace and favor with God and man. And so Jesus, the perfect Son of God, is like his perfection. He never had sin, but he's tempted to sin, and he's got human needs and limitations, Paul says in Philippians. And so he's like a flower that's just blossoming more and more beautifully. And so if Jesus needed that permission for basic soul care, how much more do I need that? And the other thing that is really helpful is when I get the vision and realize that it's only as I receive God's grace, not only at initial salvation, but an ongoing discipleship and sanctification, is I am growing in grace, which includes empathetic relationships. That is what's strengthening me and empowering me and giving me the insight to be more helpful to other people. So when I went on this journey of receiving empathy, my understanding of the Bible is so deepened, because I was in a different and deeper place. My understanding of how to care for other people, both in preaching, also in discipleship, certainly in conversations of shepherding and care, I was so much able to be more present and attuned to people. They were receiving so much more from God and from God's word through me, because me, the instrument, was more deeply loved. And part of being more deeply loved is it enables me to be more deeply loving. And so that's where you're so right that our book on empathy is so different, because usually it's almost like boring. It's like, well, here's the listening skills. I know I should do those. And it's like, yeah, we do talk about the listening skills, but it's a small piece of the book. It's a lot more about what's going on internally, like you were saying, Noe, in my relationship with God and my relationship with others, to learn how to really grow in grace, so that I can be more fruitful and effective in giving God's love and grace and wisdom to other people.
Where does empathy show up? And let's wrap this with this. We're talking to people who are in transition, or they're about to send somebody into a season of transition. And I'm curious where empathy plays for somebody who just lost their job, somebody who is just burning out in their ministry position, and they're like, I don't have anything left. To somebody who's having to sit down in the next week and have this conversation with somebody and say, you're not going to work here anymore. We love you, but you're not working here anymore. Where does empathy fit in those conversations?
Well,
Go.
it fits in all of them because in every situation, we need to be able to receive empathy and know that God is with us. I love how Hebrews 4:15 says we do not have a high priest who's unable to empathize with us, but one who empathizes with us because he was tempted and tested and tried in every way we are. So certainly Jesus knows the pain of betrayal, which some of listeners right now might be feeling. He knows the pain of loss, of grief. He experienced transitions in his life from his work leading his family after Joseph died at home and working as a carpenter, or maybe that was a stone cutter, depending upon how the Greek word is interpreted. But and then starting a ministry and learning to raise up others who would then carry on the mission of the church, and so many different things. And he also learned to set boundaries. There were people that wanted to follow him that he said no to, and people within his own circle that betrayed him. And so Jesus certainly experienced whatever pain or trauma or challenge we are experiencing. He was tempted to it. Jesus didn't burn out, but certainly he experienced the temptation. And he had other people that wanted to raise him up the ladder real quick and give him lots of prominence. And he withdrew from the crowds and didn't let them into prayer. So I think looking at Jesus's life and seeing how he has empathy for us is a good place to start, but it's not enough. We need an ambassador of Christ who can also give us that empathy. And we may need to ask for it. It may be that we are in a place where we need to find a therapist, a coach, a spiritual director, someone who we can ask to listen to us with empathy, because empathy is so key in being able to work through the flood of emotions that we have and stresses, like you mentioned, Matt, and in the grief work. And good news is empathy is one of the 5 components of emotional intelligence. And so it also helps us to grow in emotional intelligence, which is really key to our success in life, in relationships, at work, and leadership.
And I think if you're the leader who's needing to let somebody go, and that's a very difficult conversation to have. And so to do that with empathy, I mean, how do you tell somebody that their job is ending and they need to transition? And how do you do that in a loving and compassionate way? That's a really big deal. That says a lot. I mean, Jesus says, bless those that curse you and love your enemies. And sometimes these transitions, they're really difficult for both sides, both people on both ends of the transition are oftentimes doing their best to seek the Lord. But either one or both of them might feel wronged by the other. And so how to go into that with empathy, especially if you're the one with the power in that conversation. Well, if empathy lives in you and you've learned how to receive it, then it's going to be a smaller step for you to integrate that into the difficult conversation. If you haven't received much empathy, it's going to be harder, but it's something to pray about, because that person receiving that hard news needs your consideration. They need a soft heart. They need some tenderness. They need you to go into this meeting prayerfully and with support. And most obviously, if you're the one being let go from your job and you're entering into a time of transition, like Kristi said, it's like the most important thing you can do is to find that spiritual director to talk to do the inner work, the inner journey work of healing and growth and grace, and the cathartic relief of all the stress and frustration or there was injustice perhaps in this, to get to a place where you're more healed up and more freed up, and you can then reset and participate with the Lord in bringing something good out of what was so painful.
And empathy really aids in the process of forgiveness too.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that one right there could be a whole nother podcast and a whole nother book. So maybe that's your 2.0 of after this book.
I know. I was just thinking, there's 5 components to emotional intelligence. We're going to have to talk about that again too. I'm wondering what the other 4 are. So we'll get to that. That'll be the next time we have you guys on. I know that there's somebody who's sitting here thinking, this is exactly what I need. I have to get this book now. And there's also people who are saying, nope, I don't want to talk about this. And that is also the person who absolutely needs to get the book. Where do people go starting today? Where do they go to find the book?
Yeah, the book is deeply loved. receiving and reflecting God's great empathy for you. And we are Bill and Kristi Gaultiere, and you can get that book wherever books are sold. Best way to learn about it is go to soulshepherding.org/deeply-loved-book. That'll give you a quick summary of the book, and you can link from there, to buy it. And at Soul Shepherding, you can also learn how you can come on retreat with us. If you want to participate in one of our Soul Shepherding Institute retreats, we do 8 of these a year across America in different cities. And they're 5-day immersions in a community that's authentic and gracious and empathetic and very Jesus-centered. Everybody leaves our retreats refreshed and renewed. You don't leave exhausted because you were in lectures all day, every day. We actually mentor you in how to spend time alone with Jesus and scripture meditation, meet with a spiritual director, meet with a group of friends and listen to pray with each other and be out in nature and be refreshed, get lots of sleep. And so the whole week is a time of deep, deep transformational learning in an authentic community. And that's our Soul Shepherding Institute retreats.
I'm in. I can't wait.
Yay.
We love you guys. We consider you kingdom partners, and we get to walk parallel paths in helping to restore the kingdom and the church, and recommended and referred lots and lots of people, pastors in particular, to get a sabbatical and go to Soul Shepherding and see. You guys have so many great resources. There was one point where we thought, let's create our own sabbatical resource. And I looked at yours and said, doesn't need to happen. Why reinvent? So you guys are doing great, incredible work. And we're so thankful. And go out, get the book, Deeply Loved. So thankful for you guys, Bill and Kristi Gaultiere.
Thank you so much. Such a gift to be with you.
Whether you're in a ministry transition, you're facing burnout, or you're trying to care well for someone who is, this conversation was aimed at you. You don't have to push through the pain alone. You don't have to fake it until the next season feels easier. You don't even have to be ready to be deeply loved. The truth is, God already knows, and he still draws near with empathy and not shame. If you're longing for a slower pace, deeper connection with God, and renewed capacity to love and lead well, I'm going to encourage you, pick up a copy of Deeply Loved by Bill and Kristi Gaultiere. You can also learn more about their sabbatical retreats and spiritual formation resources at soulshepherding.org. And if you want to walk with pastors and ministry leaders through their own difficult transitions, I invite you to consider joining us in what we're doing at Ministry Transitions. You can support the work, you can refer someone who needs care, or you can book a call and you can see how we help. Because it's love and loving empathy, not productivity, is what marks the people of God. Thanks for listening. This is the Life After Ministry podcast.